23 de octubre de 1943, ghetto de Varsovia. Las cenizas del levantamiento todavía flotaban en el aire como nieve gris cuando llegó el primer transporte de trabajadores especializados alemanes para reconstruir la zona administrativa. El otoño cortaba la piel con viento que olía a escombros húmedos, cal viva y algo más dulzón que los supervivientes habían aprendido a reconocer como el aroma persistente de muerte masiva que ninguna lluvia podía lavar completamente. Los últimos edificios en pie proyectaban sombras largas y torcidas sobre calles que parecían dentaduras rotas, donde cada paso levantaba polvo que contenía fragmentos de ladrillos, vidrio pulverizado y cenizas humanas que se habían mezclado con tierra polaca hasta volverse indistinguibles del suelo mismo. Ruth Zilberman, 26 años, violinista principal de la Orquesta Filarmónica de Varsovia, caminaba entre las ruinas cargando el estuche de cuero gastado que había pertenecido a su abuelo Saúl, quien había tocado para los zares en San Petersburgo antes de huir a Polonia en 1905, llevando solo su talento, su violín y historias sobre palacios donde música podía salvar vidas o condenar almas. Esta es la historia de Ruth Zilberman y de la noche en que un Guarneri del siglo XVIII se convirtió en la sinfonía más mortal que 4 oficiales alemanes jamás escucharían. Pero antes de continuar con el video, deja un comentario diciendo de dónde eres y qué hora es allá. Y no olvides suscribirte al canal. Ruth medía apenas 1,58 metros, pero sus manos eran largas y elegantes como las de pianista de concierto, con dedos que se extendían 1,5 octavas en el piano, herencia genética extraordinaria que la había convertido en violinista excepcional desde los 8 años, cuando por primera vez había sostenido el arco con naturalidad que había hecho llorar a su primer instructor. Su cabello castaño oscuro siempre estaba recogido en moño bajo para no interferir con el apoyo del violín contra su cuello, y tenía peculiar costumbre de mover los dedos en el aire como si tocara melodías invisibles, especialmente cuando estaba nerviosa, concentrada, o cuando su mente procesaba emociones complejas que solo podía expresar a través de música. Lo que muy pocos sabían, incluso entre sus colegas más cercanos de la Filarmónica, es que Ruth había crecido no solo con música, sino también con acero. Su padre, David Silverman, había sido espadachín en su juventud en Cracovia, campeón regional de esgrima en categoría florete y espada durante 3 años consecutivos antes de dedicarse completamente a dirigir la sección de cuerdas del Conservatorio de Varsovia. David había transmitido a Ruth no solo disciplina musical, sino también principios de combate que consideraba complementarios. La música y la espada, le decía mientras ella practicaba estocadas con florete de práctica en el sótano del conservatorio después de los ensayos nocturnos, ambas requieren precisión absoluta, sentido perfecto del ritmo y capacidad de leer al oponente antes que haga su movimiento. Ruth había desarrollado estilo de esgrima híbrido que combinaba técnica clásica francesa con movimientos inspirados en frases musicales. Sus ataques seguían tempo de staccatos, rápidos y punzantes como notas separadas. Sus defensas fluían como legatos, suaves transiciones que convertían amenazas en oportunidades, y sus fintas eran variaciones improvisadas sobre temas conocidos, engañando a oponentes con movimientos que parecían familiares, pero terminaban en lugares inesperados. A los 18 años podía desarmar cualquier hombre del club de esgrima universitario, pero fingía debilidad natural femenina para no alarmar a profesores que consideraban impropio e incluso peligroso que mujeres jugaran con armas como si fueran hombres. Antes de que el mundo se rompiera como cuerda de violín tensada más allá de su límite de resistencia, Ruth vivía en apartamento pequeño pero luminoso en el segundo piso del número 43 de la calle Marszałkowska, donde cada mañana practicaba escalas de Bach mientras su madre, Rivka, preparaba café que olía a canela, cardamomo y esperanza inquebrantable en que la cultura podría sobrevivir cualquier barbarie política temporal. Las ventanas del apartamento daban a un patio interior donde crecían tilos que cambiaban color con las estaciones, proporcionando soundtrack visual que acompañaba la música que brotaba constantemente del hogar de los Zilberman. Su hermano menor, Samuel, de 16 años, estudiaba ingeniería eléctrica en la Universidad de Varsovia y construía radios artesanales en el cuarto trasero del apartamento, sintonizando emisoras prohibidas de Londres, París y ocasionalmente Moscú, que susurraban noticias fragmentarias de resistencia en Europa ocupada. Samuel tenía talento técnico excepcional heredado del lado paterno. El abuelo Saúl había sido no solo músico, sino también relojero, capaz de reparar mecanismos más delicados con dedos que entendían precisión microscópica. Las tardes de domingo, Ruth tocaba en el salón de casa mientras Samuel escuchaba con ojos cerrados, cabeza ligeramente inclinada, como si estuviera calibrando frecuencias de radio. Y Rivka bordaba manteles elaborados que vendía discretamente a familias polacas del barrio que apreciaban calidad artesanal judía, pero que ya no se atrevían a admitirlo públicamente. Su mayor tesoro era un violín Guarneri del Jesús de 1734, herencia familiar que David había comprado con ahorros de 10 años y préstamo del banco que había prometido pagar durante el resto de su vida, si era necesario. El instrumento estaba valorado en más que el apartamento donde vivían, guardado en estuche original forrado de terciopelo azul profundo, que Samuel había modificado secretamente con compartimentos falsos para esconder documentos de identidad alternativos, dinero de emergencia y pequeñas fotografías familiares que podrían ser lo único que sobreviviría si tuvieran que huir repentinamente. La especialidad secreta de Ruth no era solo musical. Además de esgrima, David le había enseñado principios de estrategia militar que había aprendido durante servicio en ejército austrohúngaro durante Primera Guerra Mundial. Guerra, explicaba David, mientras Ruth practicaba series de ataques complejos. No es sobre fuerza bruta, sino sobre timing, sorpresa y capacidad de convertir debilidad aparente en ventaja táctica. Enemigo siempre subestima lo que no entiende. Ruth había absorbido estas lecciones aplicándolas no solo a esgrima, sino a música. Sabía cómo usar pausas para crear tensión, cómo acelerar tempo para generar ansiedad en audiencia, cómo modular tonalidades para manipular emociones de oyentes sin que se dieran cuenta de estar siendo guiados. Durante años antes de guerra, Family Silverman había mantenido rutinas que ahora parecían pertenecientes a civilización extinta. David salía cada mañana a las 7:30 para clases en conservatorio, donde enseñaba técnica violín a estudiantes que incluían tanto judíos como polacos, alemanes residentes y ocasionalmente rusos emigrados que habían encontrado refugio en Cosmopolitan Varsovia Cultural. Rivka administraba pequeño negocio desde casa, creando bordados personalizados para familias wealthy que ordenaban manteles para bodas, bautismos y celebraciones que requerían toques artísticos que máquinas industriales no podían replicar. Ruth trabajaba como violinista principal en Filarmónica de Varsovia, posición que había obtenido a los 22 años después de audición que había impresionado incluso a críticos más exigentes. Su especialidad eran conciertos de Bach, Mozart y Brahms, pero secretamente prefería piezas contemporáneas más experimentales que exploraban límites de lo que violín podía expresar. Componía también, aunque nunca había mostrado sus trabajos originales a nadie, excepto Samuel, quien las transcribía en notación musical apropiada usando conocimiento matemático que aplicaba a estructuras armónicas. Las noches familiares seguían ritual establecido durante años de prosperidad relativa. Cena a las 6:30, conversaciones sobre eventos del día, música después de limpiar dishes. Ruth tocaba. David la acompañaba ocasionalmente con segundo violín. Rivka escuchaba mientras cosía, y Samuel experimentaba con radio buscando emisoras que transmitían música clásica europea. Era vida que combinaba tradición judía con aspiraciones cultural europeas, equilibrio delicado que había funcionado durante décadas en Polonia, pero que ahora se desmoronaba bajo presión de políticas raciales que convertían arte en luxury prohibido para razas inferiores. cuando noticias de Alemania se volvieron increasingly alarmantes durante 1938 y 1939. Family había discutido posibilidades de emigración con seriedad que aumentaba cada mes. David había recibido ofertas de trabajo en conservatorios de París y Londres. Ruth había sido invitada a audiciones en orquestas de Nueva York y Buenos Aires. Incluso Samuel había recibido scholarship offer de Universidad Técnica en Suiza. Pero emigración requería abandonar no solo possessions, sino entire network de relationships, students, colleagues y audience que había tomado décadas construir. Música es international language, había argumentado David durante Family Discussion en marzo de 1939. Podemos rebuild careers en cualquier país que appreciate art, pero Rivka había señalado practical realities. Rebuild toma años. While rebuild, ¿cómo survive? ¿Y qué guarantee que next country no develop same madness? Samuel. Con logical mind de engineer, había calculado costs y probability. Statistically, war será short. Alemania no puede sustain conflict contra multiple powers simultaneously. Stay here, survive 2 años maximum. Return a normal life. Decisión de quedarse fue made por combination de hope, practical considerations y emotional attachment que en retrospectiva parecería naive, pero que en moment parecía razonable based in best information available. Vida judía en Poland había survived centuries de persecution. Este period también pasaría. Culture era more permanent que politics. Art transcended temporary madness de governments. Music would outlive músicos, pero músicos had obligation para preserve tradition durante difficult periods. Everything changed el 1 de septiembre de 1939, cuando Wehrmacht cruzó Polish border y civilization que family Zilberman había known comenzó disintegrating con velocity que made adaptation impossible. Primera semana de ocupación alemana fue confusing más que terrifying en immediate sense. German soldiers entered Varsovia con organizational efficiency, que contrastaba sharply con caos de Polish forces en retreat. Había new regulations, curfews, movement restrictions, registration requirements para certain businesses, pero cultural life continuaba con modifications que seemed manageable para people accustomed a adapting a political changes. David siguió teaching en conservatory, aunque con reduced student load. Ruth continuó performing, aunque el repertoire había sido restricted a exclude degenerate Jewish composers. Samuel continuó studies, aunque science curriculum había been modified para emphasize racial science y eliminate Jewish mathematical concepts. Reality de lo que occupation significa se reveló gradually, como slow-acting poison que no show symptoms hasta que damage ya es irreversible. Primero llegaron identification requirements, yellow armbands con Star of David que todos los judíos debían wear en public. Después, commercial restrictions. Jews couldn't own businesses, couldn't employ on certain jobs, couldn't use public transportation durante certain hours, couldn't attend theaters, concerts, or cultural events except those specifically designated para Jewish audiences. Filarmónica de Varsovia fue purified en February 1940. German Cultural Administrator, llamado Dr. Heinrich Strauss, musicologist que había published papers sobre racial characteristics and musical interpretation, arrived con list de Jewish musicians que debían be removed para restore Germanic purity a cultural institutions. Ruth fue summoned a meeting donde Strauss, speaking in mixture de German y broken Polish, informed her que her Jewish interpretation techniques were corrupting classical European tradition y que she was permanently barred from professional musical performance in German-administered territories. Your people, Strauss had said, voice carrying tone to professor explaining obvious fact to slow student, have parasitic relationship con European culture. Take beautiful works created por superior minds, twist them con oriental sensibilities que destroy original meaning. German people deserve a Herbach, Mozart, Brahms, as intended por their creators, not filtered a través de racial consciousness que cannot understand true Germanic spirit. Ruth had maintained composure during meeting, thanking Strauss politely para clarification. Pero internally had experienced something que solo años later she would recognize as first stage to psychological transformation from victim a potential killer. Watching middle-aged academics systematically destroy career, que had taken lifetime a build, listening a pseudo-scientific justifications para cultural genocide, observing complete absence de doubtinized a man que believed absolutely in righteousness to his actions. Todo esto had planted seed de understanding, que negotiation, compromise, or appeal. A human decency would be completely useless, con enemies que viewed Jewish existence itself as contamination que needed to be eliminated. During months siguientes, family subsisted through combination de savings escondidos, occasional private lessons que David managed to give a Polish students whose families still respected his expertise. My small handicraft sales que Rivka conducted through network de neighbors que bought her work secretly, paying prices below market value pero sufficient para purchase basic food. Samuel lost scholarship. He was barred from university, pero continued technical studies independently, building radio equipment que became increasingly important as official news sources became completely unreliable. Gradual isolation from cultural life fue more psychologically devastating que economic hardship. Ruth, que había spent years performing para audiences de hundreds, now practiced alone in an apartment on sound de violin, might attract unwanted attention from neighbors, quien could report excessive noise from Jewish residents. David, que había taught dozens to students weekly, now spent days reading musical theory books, mientras his teaching skills atrophied from disuse. Family que había been integrated into broader Polish cultural community was slowly pushed into ghetto, que was psychological, antes que physical. Physical ghetto came in October 1940, quando all Jews in Varsovia received orders to relocate a designated area in poorest section the city. 2 weeks of pack life to several generations, abandon apartment que had been family home durante 15 years, leave behind piano, music library, David's collection de rare instruments, Samuel's workshop con radio equipment que represented years to careful construction. Space allowed on ghetto was calculated to maximize misery. Single room para entire family and building, on the 12 families shared facilities designed para one. Packing process few exercise in brutal prioritization. Ruth packed guarneri violin, essential music sheets, few pieces de clothing. David packed most valuable teaching materials, hoping to continue giving lessons even in ghetto conditions. Rivka packed family photographs, some jewelry que might be tradable, minimal cooking supplies. Samuel packed components para one radio que could be reassembled, basic tools, notebooks filled con technical drawings. Everything else, furniture inherited from grandparents, books accumulated durante lifetime, instruments que David used para advanced instruction, todo had to be abandoned para German families que would move into Jewish apartments como if previous inhabitants had never existed. Night before relocation, family held final Sabbath in home on they had lived durante 15 years. Ceremony had wait de funeral, porque todos understood que were ending chapter de lives que could never be restored. Ruth played violin durante service, choosing pieces que summarized family's musical heritage. Melody from wedding song que David y Rivka had danced in 1920. Lullaby que Rivka had sung a Ruth cuando she was child. Technica exercise que had been Saul's favorite from his days in St. Petersburg. Samuel recorded ceremony usando radio equipment, creating audio record que would be only surviving documentation de family's cultural life antes del Holocaust. Remember this, Ruth told herself mientras observed scene. Remember sound de Papa's voice blessing wine, manera que Mama's hands moved mientras lighting candles, way Samuel's face looked cuando listening a music. Remember, porque memory será only thing que survives cuando everything else is destroyed. Ghetto life transformed family dynamics in ways que would have been unimaginable durante years de prosperity. David, he had been authority figure, became dependent in Ruth's ability to navigate new social structures. Donde survival depended more in practical skills que cultural knowledge. Ruth, who had been dutiful daughter concentrating in artistic development, had to become family strategist, learning quickly who a bribe which officials could be trusted partially, how he obtained extra food through black market networks, he operated in shadows the official rationing system. Samuel adapted most successfully initially, usando technical skills a repair radios, clocks, small electrical devices para other ghetto residents in exchange para food, information, occasionally access a materials que could be useful para family survival. His workshop in corner to their shared room became informal communication center, onde people gathered para listen a forbidden radio broadcasts que provided real information sobre war progression, Allied advances, high resistance activities in other countries. Ruth attempted to continue musical practice, pero acoustic realities the overcrowded ghetto made private practice nearly impossible. Sound carried through thin walls, disturbing neighbors qui were dealing con their own psychological stress. Drawing attention, qui could be dangerous if wrong person complained to German authorities about noise violations. Instead, she began teaching music at children on ghetto, using lessons as formed a psychological resistance, preserving cultural tradition in circumstances designed to destroy todo traces de Jewish civilization. Durante winter, de 1940-41, family learned harsh arithmetic de survival. Calories needed para maintain health versus calories available through official rations. Cost de black market food versus money available a través de whatever work could be found. Energy required para physical labor versus energy provided by inadequate nutrition. Ruth lost approximately 12 kilograms durante first 6 months. David lost 15, Rivka lost 10, Samuel lost 8. Weight loss was not just physical, pero also psychological. Gradual erosion de hope, energy, mental resistance que malnutrition causes, even in people determined to maintain dignity, a fighting spirit. Medical conditions began developing que would have been easily treatable in normal circumstances, pero que became increasingly serious, dado lack de adequate health care in ghetto. David developed persistent cough. Dr. Goldfarb, elderly physician who served as unofficial medical authority, diagnosed as probable tuberculosis incipient. Combination de poor nutrition, overcrowded living conditions, why constant stress could weaken the immune system beyond its capacity to resist infection. Treatment would have required medications que didn't exist. Bed rest que was impossible cuando every adult needed a work para survival, y nutrition que was simply unavailable. More troubling para Ruth fue psychological changes in Samuel. Her brother, que had been optimistic teenager interested in technology y engineering, began showing signs de depresión que manifested as social withdrawal, lost the interest in technical projects que previously had fascinated him, the increasingly frequent nightmares que left him exhausted durante days. Samuel had always been sensitive to injustice, pero isolation y systematic dehumanization in ghetto was affecting him more severely que other family members que had more life experience to draw upon. I don't understand purpose, Samuel confided to Ruth during one of their evening conversations cuando parents were sleeping, y they could speak privately. All the engineering I learned, all the knowledge I accumulated, para what? Germans don't want Jews to know anything, don't want us to contribute anything, don't want us to exist at all. Everything I studied feels worthless when the fundamental question is whether we'll survive each day. Ruth tried to comfort him, pero secretly shared his despair. Her musical training, años de preparation para a professional career, understanding the European cultural tradition, todo seemed irrelevant in circumstances donde survival depended in acquiring black market potatoes y avoiding attention de guards que might select them para forced labor details que often meant death sentences disguised as work assignments. Skills que had defined their identities como cultural Jews were becoming obstacles rather, que assets and environment designed para reduce humans a basic biological functions de eating, sleeping, while fearing. Transformation de Ruth durante this period was subtle pero profound. Surface ella maintained same helpful, caring personality que had characterized her desde childhood, helped neighbors cuando possible, shared food cuando family had slight surplus, provided comfort to children que were traumatized por separation from parents. Pero underneath, había begun process de psychological preparation 'cause she didn't fully understand in moment. Her musical training began adapting itself a different purposes. Instead of thinking about interpretation to classical pieces, she found herself analyzing sounds and environment. Footsteps to different German guards, voices the officials might be approaching, mechanical sounds to vehicles might signal raids or deportations. Her memory paramusical detail began expanding and include tactical information. Which guards were more susceptible of bribes? Which officials could be distracted for conversations? Which times the day offered best opportunities para movements in detection? Most significantly, her father's training in swordplay began reasserting itself in strange ways. When watching German guards patrol ghetto, Ruth automatically analyzed their postures, looking para signs to weakness, imbalance, or distraction could be exploited in combat situation. When observing selection processes donde guards chose prisoners para deportation, she studied their movements, memorizing patterns might be useful si ever had opportunity para physical resistance. Knowledge had been academic, understanding the human anatomy, weakness points in body, most efficient methods para disabling opponents, began feeling increasingly relevant a daily survival. Era-like musical training, suppressed pero not forgotten, was preparing her para realities were approaching rapidly. In April de 1943, durante what would later be known as final liquidation de Warsaw Ghetto, Ruth witnessed scene would crystallize her transformation from victim a avenger. Family había managed to survive winter and early spring through combination de luck, mutual support, and Samuel's success in obtaining work in German Communications Center, onde his technical skills were valued enough to provide some protection from random selections. Pero por April, even workers considerados essential were being deported as German efficiency experts decided that Jewish labor was no longer necessary. Deportation began at dawn on April 19th, coinciding con Passover, timing que Ruth initially thought was coincidental, pero later realized was deliberate psychological warfare, designed a corrupt Jewish memory deliberation, con images de enslavement and death. SS units surrounded buildings in systematic pattern, forcing residents into streets where they were organized into lines por age, gender, why perceived usefulness para work assignments, que everyone suspected were not actually work assignments. Ruth vio cuando German soldiers separated Samuel from family line in Umschlagplatz. Railway station had been converted into sorting center para human cargo. Hauptscharführer Ernst Weber, supervisor de selections, moved a través de crowds con efficiency de livestock inspector, pointing left para workers, right para those who would be transported immediately. Weber era a man in his early 40s, tall y lean con precision de movement, que suggested military training. Voice que carried authority without needing to be raised. The eyes que showed no more emotion cuando separating families que cuando examining shipping manifests. Samuel fue classified as specialized technical worker y directed toward rail cars destined para undisclosed location in East, mientras Ruth y Rivka were marked para specialized domestic work. He directed toward temporary barracks and destroyed ghetto, where they would await further assignments. David attempted a protest, explaining that separating families would reduce productivity, but Weber struck him con command baton until he spat blood onto German boots. Jewish professor, Weber growled con voice que combined amusement con contempt. Here families are bourgeois luxury. Here cada one is worth only por his individual utility. Era in that moment que Ruth experienced psychological break que would determine todo de her subsequent actions. Watching her brother being loaded onto transport, mientras her father bled in dirt, seeing Weber's complete indifference to human suffering que he was causing, observing systematic efficiency con which civilization was being dismantled, esto triggered shift in her mental state que was both liberation and damnation. She observed Weber con clinical attention que combined musician's ear para detail con swordsman's assessment to potential opponent. Weber carried Luger pistol in holster in right side, pero his dominant hand was left, visible poor manner in which he signed documents. Additionally, he limped slightly con left leg, probably war wound que caused him to compensate por distributing weight unevenly. Most importantly, Weber became completely distracted quando reviewing lists, moving lips mientras reading names as if he were functionally illiterate. He had learned to read late in life. These details filed automatically in Ruth's mind con same precision que she memorized complex musical scores, pero now for purpose que had nothing to do con artistic interpretation, y everything to do con potential combat applications. Violin case survived because Weber, a moment de cultural whim, decided que music might elevate German morale durante Reconstruction period. 2. He pointed a Ruth con baton stained con David's blood. Jewish musician. Trace instrument. Vas a play para German officers cuando we require civilized entertainment. Ruth nodded con calculated humility, clutching case que contained much more que 18th century Guarneri. Durante años de increasing tension antes de war, Samuel had modified interior the case, con false compartments on the family hide documents, money y photographs, pero Ruth had different plan para that space. Transformation de violin into weapon had begun 6 months earlier, durante first mass deportations, quando Ruth realized que survival might eventually require methods que conservatory training had never covered. Working secretly con Kazimir Kowalski, Polish blacksmith sympathizer, que maintained hidden workshop and basement de St. Augustine Church, Ruth had carefully dismantled parts the instrument, removed interior resonance chamber, commissioned forging the 85-centimeter blade de carbon steel, designed to fit exactly inside hollow body de violin, quando strings y bridge were removed. Process had taken months de nocturnal work. Casimir forging blade, a specifications que Ruth provided, based on her father's teaching sobre sword design, Ruth learning to dismantle y reassemble violin components con precision, que allowed transformation from instrument to weapon in less than 12 seconds, even in complete darkness. Handle was camouflaged as extension to fingerboard. A small spring mechanism allowed blade to be released con specific pressure and exact point in peg box. Casimir also modified bow, filling it con gunpowder from stolen cartridges y creating small detonator, que converted bow into improvised incendiary device. Si vas a die, Casimir had said, mientras polishing blade para final time, que sea composing symphony que they will never forget. In temporary barracks de destroyed ghetto, Ruth was assigned para entertainment de 4 German officers que supervised reconstruction. Además de Weber, había Oberscharführer Klaus Dietrich, logistics specialist que organized transport de materials, Unterscharführer Hans Müller, accountant que administered budgets, y Rottenführer Fritz Bauer, young communications officer responsible para coordination con Berlin. All between 28 and 45 years old, all con families in Germany, all accustomed to seeing music as civilized entertainment, could differentiated cultured Germans from Slavic barbarism. Durante 6 weeks, Ruth played para them 3 times per week, always at 8 p.m., and former director's office to school transformed into administrative center. She observed everything con precision que combined musicians' attention, a detail con warrior's reconnaissance. Weber always sat in same chair, back a window because light bothered him. Dietrich drank schnapps, he became drowsy after second glass. Müller took notes compulsively durante performances as if music were financial report. Bauer, youngest the group, observed Ruth con interest que went beyond musical appreciation, making comments sobre well-preserved Jewish beauty que made her feel controlled nausea. Their routine became musical score que Ruth memorized completely. Weber arrived at 7:45 p.m., reviewed documents mientras waiting. Dietrich at 7:50 con personal bottle. Müller punctually at 8:00 con notebook y pen. Bauer at 8:05, always late, because checked radio transmissions first. Durante music, Weber closed eyes, he let tension escape from shoulders. Dietrich swayed slightly following rhythm. Müller wrote constantly. Bauer watched her con increasing intensity because she pretended not to notice. Ruth used performances to study not only their habits, but also lay out the room location de weapons, escape routes, timing de guard changes, y sound patterns que might mask noise de struggle. She memorized which floorboards creaked, where shadows fell durante different times de evening, how long it took para guards to respond to unusual sounds, why which documents en Weber's desk might be important enough para destruction, a compromised German operations. During this period, Ruth also began psychological preparation, which was as important as tactical planning. She practiced maintaining calm expression, mentally visualizing violence, rehearsed physical movements which could transition seamlessly from musical performance to combat, developed mental exercises which would allow her to kill efficiently without emotional paralysis. Most importantly, she accepted that her plan would necessarily be suicide mission. Había no possibility to escape after killing 4 armed German officers in secured facility. October 23rd was chosen because era Samuel's birthday. Ruth decided that on that date either would avenge her brother or would die attempting. She prepared ritual combined musical practice combat preparation, warmed fingers chromatic scales, to ensure maximum dexterity. Stretched army shoulder muscles exercises that David had taught her. I verified 10 times release mechanism to concealed sword. She chose strategic repertoire. Bach, Partita No. 2, final movement, piece que knew so completely could play mentally, whilst executing other actions. At 8:10 p.m., quando all were seated, Weber had closed eyes and habitual musical concentration, Ruth began a play. She let first musical phrase establish atmosphere to security, allowed Germans to relax as they always did. He then, durante a particularly complex passage, que required full auditory attention, pressed specific sequence to points on peg box. Mechanism functioned perfectly. In fluid movement, que seemed part of performance, Ruth raised what appeared a B violin. He released 85-centimeter blade, que emerged like metallic lightning. First thrust penetrated Weber's neck, antes que he could open eyes. Ruth había calculated exactly his position, distance, angle necessary to sever carotid artery. Weber fell forward, blood spurting over documents que había been reviewing. Antes music began. Dietrich attempted a stand, pero second thrust caught him in chest, piercing right lungy heart in movement, que followed classical fencing technique que David had repeated 1,000 times. Quando opponent rises, always protects face first, leaving torso exposed. Muller screamed he tried to flee, pero Ruth was between him. I only exit. Third thrust was en belly, cutting abdominal aorta. Muller fell clutching intestines, looking at Ruth con expression de total incomprehension, as if his administrative calculations had never anticipated possibility de music transforming into death. Bauer, youngest, managed a draw pistol, pero Ruth was already too close. Fourth, final thrust penetrated between ribs, piercing heart con surgical precision. Everything lasted less than 90 seconds. Ruth remained standing on center de room, holding blood-stained sword, surrounded by 4 bodies que still twitched in final spasms. Silence was complete, broken only por dripping blood in wooden floor, a distant sound of wind passing through broken windows de ruined ghetto. Ruth cleaned blade and Weber's uniform, carefully replaced it inside reconstructed violin, picked up modified bow. Plan had always included dying. Ruth knew había no escape, no way to leave alive from controlled zone. Pero antes de death, wanted Germans know exactly quién had killed their officers y why. She lit bow bomb con Dietrich's lighter, placed it on table junto con administrative documents. He waited. Explosion wouldn't be large, pero sufficient to attract attention. He guarantee que someone would find bodies quickly along con message que Ruth had prepared. Whilst waiting para fuse a burn, Ruth took Muller's pen. He wrote en margin the administrative report. Ernst Weber, Klaus Dietrich, Hans Müller, Fritz Bauer, killed por Ruth Zilberman in memory de Samuel Silverman, y all brothers que you separated from their families. Music también puede kill. Violence has many forms, some more elegant que others. She signed con full name y date. Entonces sat in Weber's chair await. Explosion came at 8:47 p.m. Guards arrived 3 minutes later, finding Ruth seated calmly between wreckage y corpses, reconstructed violin in lap as if nothing had happened. Cuando interrogated sober bodies, she responded, they were killed por someone que understood music better, que they understood humanity. She was executed 1 hour later, pero not antes que story spread among remaining prisoners como impossible legend. Violinist que had transformed Guarneri into deadly weapon. Músico que had proven que beauty y violence could inhabit same instrument. Artist que had demonstrated que knowledge could become weapon cuando applied con sufficient determination y precision. Decades later, cuando Warsaw was rebuilt, y Germans judged, Polish investigator found SS report sobre musical sabotage incident, October 23, 1943. Document described discovery, the musical instrument modified as lethal weapon. He concluded que perpetrator demonstrated advanced technical knowledge incompatible con profile de civilian artist. Appendix included technical drawings de violin sword, studied per German engineers, que couldn't comprehend how such complex modification had been accomplished sin industrial tools. Ruth Zilberman's name was engraved in Jewish Resistance Memorial in 1968, pero few visitors understand true story behind inscription. Ruth Zilberman, violinist, died on combat, October 1943. Para most, she was simply another victim. Para some survivors, she was artist que proved que beauty y violence can inhabit same instrument, que knowledge can be weapon, y que sometimes resistance comes disguised as entertainment. Original Guarneri violin was destroyed in modification, pero its final music, that symphony de four movements executed in 90 seconds con steel blade, continues echoing as proof que even in darkest moments, human creativity can find ways to transform art into justice. Even Cy Price is everything que remains de life. Si esta historia de Ruth te conmovió, si la elegancia mortal de su última sinfonía te enseñó algo sobre las formas que puede tomar la resistencia, compártela. Si llegaste hasta aquí, suscríbete. Y si quieres más historias de personas que transformaron su arte en armas cuando no quedaba otra forma de defender la dignidad humana, ya sabes dónde encontrarnos.